Okay, we're going to be in Zechariah again tonight in chapters 10 and 11. And we're continuing through Zechariah, and if you remember last time we were here in chapter 9, we've moved from all these visions and things into two oracles. And we're continuing through this oracle. Last time in chapter 9, we did look at the coming king and God, the Messiah, bringing judgment on the enemies of Israel. And then there at the end of chapter 9, it talks about how the Lord will save his people. And as we jump here into chapter 10, the first verse segues off that, so it kind of bridges those. But here in chapter 10 and 11, really, we are going to end up with the idea of where God's people end up depends on what type of leaders they follow. I've traveled, not as extensive as a lot of people, but traveled around with friends, going places. And one time, I was with a friend, and we were up in Oklahoma City, and I'm not super familiar with there, so I just trusted them that they knew where they were going. Mistake number one. Well, when you live there, you assume they know where they're going. And I don't remember exactly where we were going, maybe an academy or somewhere. And I knew we were in the Midwest City area, and I thought, well, there's one over there somewhere, and if I get my phone out, I could make an effort to know where it is and direct us there. But I'll let this person drive. And like an hour later, we end up in Edmond, and I've just thought to myself, why did we go all the way over here to go to an academy or whatever place we were going? I know there's one there in Midwest City. There, it's a big old strip mall. Lived a bunch of different things. And they said, oh, this is just the closest one. I knew where it was. I thought to myself, well, then you don't know very much, do you? And so I informed them, hey, Google Maps, it'll tell you there's one like 5 miles away. But oftentimes in our life, we see people end up places, and what we find out is they end up in those places because they were following someone there. And they didn't have a clue, nor did they always intend to end up in those places, but that's where they have found themselves because those are the type of people they have followed. And sometimes we end up in really good places we never intended to because by habit, chance, or wisdom, we decided to follow a smart person. And then sometimes we end up in places where we go, how in the world did I get here? And it's because we followed someone who maybe didn't make so wise decisions. You know, I've told you this before. When Sarah was pregnant with Isaac, she was driving up to Oklahoma City to go do some postal training. She worked for the post office. And she had a GPS, just one in the car. It wasn't on her phone, it was just in a car. And it was so old it couldn't update things anymore, like traffic. And it ended up taking her through some pretty rough places. And she had no clue where she was, and she is directionally challenged. She ended up just calling me in the middle of Sunday night during church, just crying that she was lost. And so I had to give her directions to get out. But she never intended to go those places, but she was going where she was being led. And here, in Zechariah 10 and 11, we have moved away from visions, but we're going to see Zechariah asked, and I cannot tell you for sure if he physically does this or is just offering a spiritual picture. In chapter 11, he's asked to live out two living pictures of the Messiah, and one is the good shepherd. In the back half of chapter 11, one is a foolish shepherd. And so we're going to see all these things take place and compare and contrast, but the idea here is follow the faithful shepherd, not the foolish shepherd, and you will end up in a place of blessings and promises rather than destruction. So, let me read chapter 10 and we will jump in. Remember, verses 1 and 2 are kind of a bridge from chapter 9. So, ask rain from the Lord in the season of the spring rain, from the Lord who makes the storm clouds, and he will give them showers of rain. To everyone the vegetation in the field. For the household gods utter nonsense, and the diviners see lies. They tell false dreams and give empty consolation. Therefore the people wander like sheep. They are afflicted for lack of a shepherd. My anger is hot against the shepherds, and I will punish the leaders, for the Lord of hosts cares for his flock, the house of Judah, and will make them like his majestic steed in battle. From him shall come the cornerstone, from him the tent peg, from him the battle bow, from him every ruler, all of them together. They shall be like mighty men in battle, trampling the foe in the mud of the streets. They shall fight because the Lord is with them, and they shall put to shame the riders on horses. I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will save the house of Joseph. I will bring them back because I have compassion on them, and they shall be as though I had not rejected them. For I am the Lord their God, and I will answer them. Then Ephraim shall become like a mighty warrior, and their hearts shall be glad as with wine. Their children shall see it and be glad. Their hearts shall rejoice in the Lord. I will whistle for them and gather them in, for I have redeemed them. And they shall be as many as they were before. Though I scattered them among the nations, yet in far countries they shall remember me. And with their children they shall live and return. I will bring them home from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria. And I will bring them to the land of Gilead and to Lebanon, till there is no room for them. He shall pass through the sea of troubles and strike down the waves of the sea, and all the depths of the Nile shall be dried up. The pride of Assyria shall be laid low, and the scepter of Egypt shall depart. I will make them strong in the Lord, and they shall walk in his name, declares the Lord. Let's look there in chapter 10. We see in these first 12 verses the idea of, and the work of a faithful shepherd. But the first two verses, there's this transition. And it starts kind of with this rebuke. We see the Lord is the one at the end of chapter 9, offering to save his people and to provide great promises and flourishing. And then all of a sudden in chapter 10, verse 1, ask rain from the Lord. And we see in verse 2, because the household gods utter nonsense. Ask rain for the Lord. Don't ask false idols for rain and for promises and for provision. These false idols, it says there, they tell false dreams. They give empty consolation. Therefore the people wander like sheep. They are afflicted for lack of a shepherd. These false idols offer us empty consolation. You know, it's interesting to see people who cling to whatever idol that may be, especially if it's a physical object, and it always gets my brain asking questions when people cherish an item. Men sometimes like to cherish their cars. My dad's getting old, and all of a sudden he's like, "This is the car I've wanted all my life. And now I'm going to look for one and buy it." And I thought to myself, but why? You're going to go drop a whole lot of money on a car that's all nostalgia and has no gas mileage. Actually, I think he is looking for one for gas mileage as well. I don't know. But we have things that we hold on to. But it's interesting that so often this thing we cherish so much depends on us to keep it around, We put it up on the mantelpiece. No one touch my idol because you might break it. I remember growing up at my Grandma Berger's house when I was really young, jade was everywhere. If she had jade now, people would burglar her house for it. And it was like you couldn't even run through the house playing because you might shake the jade off the shelves and out of the cabinets. And however, jade was the thing. And about the time we hit 10, the jade disappeared. So grandchildren over jade. Just different things. Idols depend on us to take care of them. And we see that here. These idols offer empty consolation. And therefore, because we pursue things that offer empty consolation and have no power, the people wander like sheep. They are afflicted for lack of a shepherd. And Zechariah is saying, look, the people of God are led astray into ruin because there are no faithful leaders to follow. As they follow these false idols, they will be led with empty consolation and false dreams and lies. and they were afflicted for lack of a shepherd. Now note, here in chapter 10 and chapter 11, we've moved from present day Israel and Zechariah prophesying about Zerubbabel and Joshua to the rest of this book is foreshadowing futuristic things. And so he's foretelling a time when Israel, and this is looking towards, remember at this point in Zechariah and the time of Israel history, just a few hundred years till Jesus shows up. The time of the kings is over. Now we're still kind of a puppet papal state for a while until Greece and Rome come in and take everything over. And still then. And so, he's foreshadowing things beyond Jesus into modern day times, some people want to say, about the sheep being without a shepherd. And there in verse 3, my anger is hot against the shepherds, and I will punish the leaders, for the Lord of hosts cares for his flock, the house of Judah. The shepherd of God as the shepherd, watches his sheep, and he gives us some weird imagery if we don't know what's going on. He says, the Lord of hosts cares for his flock, the house of Judah, and I'm going to make, he says there in verse 3, make them like his majestic steed in battle. Now, let's just pause because I think this is funny. Have you ever watched mutton busting at the rodeo? Yes. Look, I remember going to those, and my grandpa pre-planned it, no helmet, all right, but apparently we needed glasses, and would not tell my mother we were going to be on a mutton sheep busting time, and straight up, hey, I want some cash, okay. But now my mom knows, and she totally won't let me take Lily to those things. But it's a far cry from a sheep to majestic war steed. Am I right? Never seen a toddler in their majestic war sheep or something. And right here, the Lord of hosts cares for his flock, the house of Judah, my sheep, and I'm going to make them like his majestic steed in battle. We see, just some imagery, God is watching his sheep like a warrior gives attention to his horse. He's watching them closely. He's making sure everything is as it should be. The Lord is giving such close attention and care to Judah, and he shows the work he's going to give them there in verses 4 and 5 with 3 images describing the work of his Messiah or the faithful shepherd. Right there in verse 4, from him shall come the cornerstone, from him the tent peg, from him the battle bow, and then from him every ruler, all of them together. These 3 images. So we have the cornerstone. The cornerstone orients your building and the arrangement you have it. It helps ground that building and create a foundational piece. It's faithful. It's reliable. Jesus is said to be the cornerstone. We see in Psalm 118:22. I can get over there. It says this is the Lord, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And this whole chapter in 118 is talking about Jesus. But as we look here in Zechariah chapter 10, this chapter makes no sense whatsoever except when you look at it through a messianic lens. And so we have these 3 images. Jesus as the cornerstone, the faithful shepherd that will watch over people. He will be faithful and he will be reliable and he will orient us straight and he will create a strong foundation. He is the tent peg. A tent peg secures your tent. It creates stability. He will provide a home for his people. He is the battle bow. He is fearless and he is powerful. And in his strength and his stability shows his people he will bring them victory. And as we move there into verse 6, he says, I will strengthen the house of Judah and I will save Joseph. And from 6 through 12, we see a whole lot of description of things that God is going to do. In fact, my commentary said we have 21 imperatives in these 6 verses that God says he will do as the faithful shepherd. And I just want to highlight to you there are 8 I wills, much less more I have, I did, I do. And so we have 6 through 12 a whole bunch of I will. It's God saying, I will do this. I will bring forth all these things. I will strengthen the house of Judah. I will save the house of Joseph. I will bring them back. At the end of verse 6, I will answer them. There in verse 8, I will whistle for them and gather them in. Verse 10, I will bring them home from the land of Egypt and gather them from Assyria. And I will bring them to the land of Gilead and to Lebanon. In verse 12, I will make them strong in the Lord. The shepherd is the one who does everything for us. And in this text, we see all these imperatives of what God is going to do. He will give us strength. He will save us. He will return his people to their place. He will whistle like a shepherd does for the sheep and gather them in. In fact, here we have some allusions to a foreshadowed promise that God is going to bring his people back to their land, which many people believe has been satisfied in the creation of Israel as a nation state today, in our time. And then, in fact, we have not only will they be brought back, but look there in verse 10, it says, I will bring them to the land of Gilead and to Lebanon. There will be so many of my people who return to their home. We will overflow out of our borders onto those around us. And so we have this future-oriented passage of all these things that God will do as the faithful shepherd. But there in chapter 11, we see a movement to a contrast between foolish shepherds and what Zechariah kind of says, the forsaken shepherd, but the true shepherd. And so let's look there in chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. We have the wailing of the fallen shepherds. Open your doors, O Lebanon, that the fire may devour your cedars. Wail, O cypress, for the cedar has fallen, for the glorious trees are ruined. Wail, oaks of Bashan, for the thick forest has been felled. The sound of the wail of the shepherds, for the glory is ruined. The sound of the roar of the lions, for the thicket of the Jordan is ruined. And here we have some predictive prophecy once again, showcasing the results of the people of Israel in chapter 11, rejecting the Messiah and choosing fallen humanly leaders to lead them, and it leads them to ruin. And here we have in these first three verses some imagery, once again, of three trees. You see the cedar, you have the cypress, and you have the oak. And these three are, once again, normally all these trees talk about leaders and leadership or kings. And it's a reference to what many scholars think are the three classes of leaders in Israel: the king, the priests, and the prophets. And each of these have fallen here in Zechariah chapter 11 because they've served themselves instead of the Lord. And not only have they fallen, they're wailing about it. We can say they're whining. And they're wailing not that the glory of the Lord has been ruined, but that their own glory is ruined. Look there in verse 3, the sound of the wail of the shepherds, for their glory is ruined. And Israel will be overthrown once again, and many people think that is a reference to AD 70 years after Jesus, where Rome comes in and finally kicks Jerusalem in the teeth and levels the whole place to the ground. And there in verse 4, we have moved from a wailing shepherd to a wisdom of a forsaken shepherd. Thus said the Lord my God, and this is where we have Zechariah kind of saying, God told me to be a living picture. We see throughout the prophets, especially Old Testament prophets, that God often has them live out whatever imagery he's trying to get Israel to figure out. And so here he says, become shepherd of the flock doomed to slaughter. Verse 5, those who buy them slaughter them and go unpunished, and those who sell them say, blessed be the Lord, I have become rich, and their own shepherds have no pity on them. For I will no longer have pity on the inhabitants of this land, declares the Lord. Behold, I will cause each of them to fall into the hand of his neighbor, and each into the hand of his king, and they shall crush the land, and I will deliver none from their hand. Verse 7, so I became the shepherd of the flock, doomed to be slaughtered by the sheep traders. And I took 2 staffs, one I named Favor, and the other I named Union, and I tended the sheep. Zechariah says, I became. This is some foreshadowing. We don't know exactly how this happened, but favor, God's blessing, and I had union. I united God's people. And there in verse 8, in 1 month, I destroyed the 3 shepherds, but I became impatient with them, and they detested me. So I said, I will not be your shepherd. What is to die, let it die. So in 1 month, this is probably the quickest leadership turnover a new pastor has had ever. In 1 month, he kicked out everyone who was terrible in the congregation, in the nation. And then very quickly it says, they detested me. I removed all the bad leadership. I removed all these bad false shepherds who were selling the sheep off into slaughter. And you know what the sheep said to me? I don't like you. I detest you. Why did you get rid of our false shepherds? We like them better than you. We like them better than your favor and your blessings, and we like them better than your union with the Lord and with the shepherd. And very quickly, this got to be like the quickest pastorate in the world right here. Verse 9, so I said, I will not be your shepherd. Wow, gave up pretty quick. I will not be your shepherd. What is to die, let it die. What is to be destroyed, let it be destroyed. And let those who are left devour the flesh of one another. Verse 10, and I took my staff Favor, and I broke it, annulling the covenant that I had made with all the peoples. So it was annulled on that day, and the sheep traders who were watching me knew that it was the word of the Lord. Verse 12, then I said to them, if it seems good to you, give me my wages. But if not, keep them. And they weighed out my wages, 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. Then I broke my second staff union, annulling the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. So here we have the wisdom of the foolish shepherd. He has come to guide them, and they have rejected him, and they have chosen, we'd rather have the foolish shepherds. Why do you think people reject Jesus? This is for you have a chance, audience participation here. Okay, because they can't see him. I can see that. He's not physically here as a person. They want to do what they want to do. I could agree with that. What he wants to do doesn't seem like fun. Anybody else? Control. Another thing I hear a lot is, that Bible stuff, it's kind of outdated. Right? That's for old people or old dead people. Right? We've intellectually grown beyond that. I mean, I've had people tell me that. We want something more intellectual. Some people just reject Jesus because they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to be embarrassed by a life it would take to follow Jesus and have people mock them or think little of them. I've had people just straight up call me, hey, you're dumb because you believe in Jesus. Like, how could you stoop to that level? Some people reject Jesus because Jesus messes up their religion. And you can go on like a religion like Islam or Hinduism or however, or you can just say old-timey religion. Jesus messes up my religion. He changes what I really want to do to make myself feel good. They do. Some people do. So when the wise shepherd, when rejected, he would not be their shepherd. He broke favor and union, and he asked for his wages. And here in Zechariah 11, several hundred years before Jesus is on the throne there and alive, he says, ask for my wages. 30 pieces of silver. And if you didn't know, I want to remind you that that's the cost that you would have to pay to someone to fix, I guess you repay someone for their slave that's been hurt and can no longer work. and that person's essentially worthless. Well, I'll give you back some of the cost of your loss of 30 pieces of silver. And so, when we don't follow the good shepherds, we find that the foolish shepherds lead us to destruction. And here, Zechariah is just saying, look, if you're not going to follow the good shepherd, if you're not going to follow the wise shepherd, you can have the foolish shepherd. And he doesn't have a lot of patience with it, at least in this text. Yeah. And that's that foreshadowing. Way several hundred years before Jesus shows up, and Judas gets paid for selling off Jesus. It's 30 pieces of silver. Jesus is worthless. The good shepherd is worthless. We'd rather have our foolish shepherd. And here's what's weird. If you look there in verses 15 through 17. Then the Lord said to me, take once more the equipment of a foolish shepherd. You need to live out what a foolish shepherd would do. For behold, I am raising up in the land a shepherd who does not care for those being destroyed, or seek the young, or heal the maimed, or nourish the healthy, but devours the flesh of the fat ones, tearing off even their hooves. In verse 17, woe to my worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. Let his arm be wholly withered, and his right eye utterly blinded. The foolish shepherd does not care. The foolish shepherd does not seek. The foolish shepherd does not heal. The foolish shepherd devours, even to the last bit, the hooves. I've never had any type of hoof in my life. Maybe you people who like pig's feet. Anybody in here? You don't like them? Okay. Whew. There is hope for you. All right. Even down to the last bit of stuff you wouldn't touch. They eat and devour, and so they don't care. They don't heal. They devour. They destroy. And we're here to remember that. To remember that the foolish shepherd only seeks to destroy, but the good shepherd is rejected, even though he seeks to do good. I want to remind you of an analogy I told you one time, probably this last year. There was a tourism group in Israel going along, and their guide was telling them all about shepherds. Shepherds in Israel today work a lot just like the shepherds did in the time of Jesus, and you'll see them in their traditional garb out there on the hills as we're driving along. And he said, but a true shepherd is going to be leading his flock from the front. And they're going along, and they see a guy dressed like a shepherd, except he's from the back, and he's got a whip and a cane, and he's driving these sheep along. And this tourist says, well, hey, what about that guy? That's a shepherd, and he's driving those sheep along. And the tour guide says, that's not a shepherd, that's the butcher. There are a lot of times when we want to follow someone, and they look good, and they sound good, and go places that look good and sound good and appeal to us, but really it's the foolish shepherd, the false shepherd, leading us to a place of destruction. The worthless shepherd leads us to death, but the faithful shepherd leads us to life. I don't know about you. We're pretty smart people in this room. Pretty, I would say, theologically solid. But I still find myself sometimes tempted by the foolish shepherd. Do you? Sometimes I go, I don't know if I want to follow that shepherd, because that doesn't seem, as Phyllis said, that doesn't seem as fun sometimes. That doesn't appeal to my desires. And if we can be tempted by the worthless shepherd, the false shepherd, so can others. And so it's a reminder to us here in Zechariah, and we will probably finish up Zechariah this next Wednesday, probably pretty close, if not. But in order to follow the Lord, we've got to follow the true shepherd. And God shows us just here in Zechariah what he will do for us as the true shepherd and the Messiah, especially there in chapter 10. I will strengthen them. I will save them. I will gather my people. I will bring them home. I will provide for them. If we come off chapter 9, the Lord will provide for us crowns of jewels and will save us as the flock of his people like a crown of jewels, and he will provide great beauty and bounty to us. We've got to remember that sometimes, even though the true shepherd, he has to get the staff out, staff union and favor, and that's no fun. He has our best benefits in line, and we can tell the health of people and of a church by what shepherd they're following. Let's pray. Dear God, I thank you for your word, and just thank you for the great spring lunch we had today, and for the faces we got to see and engage. And it's a great time to be together, something that we've sorely missed. I thank you so much that we've been able to celebrate your atonement today. And we're looking forward, as we're going to discuss this next week, your resurrection. But God, don't let Easter be the only time we think about the cross. Don't let Easter be the only time we think about your resurrection. Let us be people who can't help but shout for joy for the hope we find in the cross and in the resurrection every day of our lives. Let it color our vision, let it color our values, and let it steer us to follow the Good Shepherd. And everything I pray. Amen. All right. I'll see you on Wednesday if we're not blown away or the creek don't rise, according to the meteorologists. Yep. I will be sharing a devotion tomorrow at noon, and then we're feeding Tuesday at noon.